Hi, welcome everybody. My name is JD and this is my channel Frost and Forest. And today I'm going to try something that I think will be kind of fun. So today I'm going to talk to you all about some deck deal breakers for me. These are essentially things that if a deck has them or looks like them or this rule describes them, then I am more likely to pass on the deck than go out and be pretty excited about it. Today, I'll talk to you about some of those deal breakers, give some examples for some decks that I thought about getting, but just ultimately decided not to. And then I'm gonna show you the deck in my collection that breaks that rule. The other thing that I wanted to say is these are just my perspectives. These are preferences that I have for decks. If you like any of the things that I talk about or like any of the decks that I mentioned that I decided to pass on, that's great. Part of what makes tarot so great is we all have different preferences, and there are so many amazing decks out there that, you know, we can all kind of pick and choose the decks that we like. And honestly, when people disagree on some of these things, it just makes the conversation more interesting. I'm going to start talking to you about some of my deck deal breakers. A big deal breaker for me when it comes to decks is if a deck is too big. I have very small hands, so, you know, if a deck is too hard for me to use, I tend not to use it. And so one example of this is I really thought that the 78 Tarot Halloween deck in the larger size was so awesome. I thought that the art would be great in that larger size. I know that their larger decks tend to be luxurious, and so I really was tempted to get the larger size. But as you can see, I ended up getting the pocket one because I was just worried that if I got the larger size, the normal size, I wasn't going to use it because it's a big, chunky deck, and just a lot of times that just doesn't work for me. So this is one example of a deck I passed on because of one of my deck deal breakers. But this is a deck that if you, again, watch my channel, you won't be surprised. But I absolutely love the Guiding Muse Tarot. That's what this deck is. I love this deck. And so even though it is large and a little bit chunky and can be a little bit hard for me to shuffle, and it's a little bit heavy to do hand over hand shuffling, I still have this deck and love this deck. And you know, I won't talk about this a ton because I've talked about it before, but just in general, I love the art. I love the following this character. I love that this character lives in this like old Victorian type home. I love that this deck celebrates sort of the small things in life, the small wins, but also recognizes the hardship that there is in life as well. And so I just think that this is a great everyday deck and I love it. And so even though it breaks one of my deck deal breakers, I still have this deck. So this is the Guiding Muse. So a second deck deal breaker for me are collage decks. Collage decks in general are just not an art style I prefer. It tends to feel very disjointed to me, and it's just not something that I in particular am attracted to. And so honestly, there are not a lot of collage decks out there that I even have thought about getting or have been wanting to get. I do have one artist in particular that I love her collage work. And so this is the Wisdom of the Depths Tarot. This is very obviously a collage deck, as you can see. It's very watery. And for whatever reason, when this creator makes a collage deck, this is the same person who made Echoes Through Time, as well as The Quiet Rebel. I just love the way she does collage. And I think part of the reason why I love it and it doesn't kind of break my no collage deck rule is because I think she does a good job of layering the art, so it feels very cohesive to me, even though it clearly is pulling art from different sources. And so this was one of the first collage decks that I ever decided to get, just because, you know, just because normally collage decks are a no-go for me. So this is the Wisdom of the Depths Tarot. So my third deck deal breaker is decks that have a lot of eye imagery. So basically, the best way I know how to describe this is, you know, decks that kind of put eyes in places that don't necessarily need to have eyes, or, you know, just use a lot of eye imagery in the art. For whatever reason, I don't like that. I find it kind of creepy for myself. You know, obviously there might be some shadow work that I could be doing there about why I'm so uncomfortable with a lot of eyes in art. But for whatever reason, that just doesn't work to me. And so one deck that I've thought about getting a lot is the Witch Folk Tarot, I think it's called. It's that sort of folk witchy deck. I've seen it, I think, like, I've seen it maybe called like Folk Witch Tarot or Witch Folk Tarot. This deck just is one that I've seriously thought about getting, but the eye imagery was just too much for me. The deck that is the exception, and this deck is called the Whimsical Goddess Tarot. This is a deck that is relatively new to me. It is by the same artist that did, I think it's called the Botanical Blessings Oracle. So of course we're not coming across many cards that have eyes in it, which I think is maybe why I partially like this card. But for example, there are eyes on the back of these cards, and there are some other cards in here that definitely have eyes, because I've definitely noticed it. I'm just trying to get to some of those cards. But I think that this is a beautiful deck. And I think that part of the reason why, even though it has eyes, especially at least on the back, but I thought it had more. Okay, so like an eye there. Oh, you know what? I think it's the sword suit that has a lot of eyes in it. But anyway, this deck, even though it does have eyes in it and eyes on the back, I just love this deck. I love the colors. I love that it's teeny tiny and I can shuffle it. I love that it has a lot of different body types in it. It just feels so cozy. And so I think because there are so many things that I love about this deck, and the fact that now that I'm re-looking at this, there are not actually as many cards with eyes on them as I thought there were, I think that that's partially why this deck is okay. And like the eyes on the back, they're pretty small because it's a small deck. I don't know. But anyway, this is one of my exceptions to decks that have extra eyes in the imagery. But not nearly as many eyes as I remember. Anyway, this is the one with extra eyes, and this is the Whimsical Goddess Tarot. And I just think this deck is so cute and cozy. I found one more eye card in this deck. See, I'm not crazy. There are some cards with eyes in them. So sort of on the other end, also a deck deal breaker for me, are decks that the people don't have faces. So they just, it's blank where their face should be. For whatever reason, it reminds me of like a Doctor Who episode, and it makes me uncomfortable for them not to have faces. And so, you know, decks that do that, I tend to steer clear of. But one of the decks that I seriously thought about and kind of struggled with is the Black Tarot. I thought that deck is beautiful. I thought the art was beautiful. I loved the kind of like different textures in that art. I just thought that was a beautiful deck, but I couldn't get over the fact that there are not really faces in that deck. And so, you know, ultimately I decided yes on the Black Tarot. It's cheating a little bit. The one that I'm going to show you that I think is kind of an exception is the Star Seeker Tarot. So, you know, if, for example, if you face here, you can see that the features of the face are super light. So you can kind of just barely see a nose. You can kind of see the outline of eyes. So this is kind of edge. And I think that that is, and again here, like you can see that the facial features are really light, but they are there. And so I think that this is kind of why this is my exception, because in some of the cards, it does look like they don't have a ton of facial features that you can see, but they do have enough for me to feel comfortable with this deck. And so this is the pocket size. Again, I have small hands, so I tend to choose pocket size ones. But I think that this is a beautiful deck. And there are enough facial features to make this deck okay for me. But yeah, I love this Wheel of Fortune card with the spider web. Anyway, so yeah, this is kind of a little bit of a cheat, but this is the deck that sort of breaks the decks that don't have facial features rules. So the next deck deal breaker for me are animal decks, but they have animals from all over the world put together. So one example of a deck that I seriously considered getting is Animal Botanical Tarot. I think the art in that deck is beautiful. I've heard the guidebook is pretty good. So, you know, it is a deck that I thought about getting, but it has the issue where it kind of feels like a zoo deck is the best way I know how to describe it, in that animals that are not naturally supposed to be together are just all kind of put together. And so that can be a deal breaker for me. Now, I actually have a few different exceptions to this rule. I'm going to show you my favorite one. This is the Animal Totem Tarot. This is one of my favorite animal decks. I actually thought about rehoming this, or I did rehome this deck, and I missed it so much that it's one of 2 decks that I have ever rebought. But I really like this deck, and it does have clearly animals from other parts of the world. Like, for example, they're not really octopuses by me. But I think part of the reason why this deck is sort of an exception, and I love it, is, you know, obviously we don't have like native flamingos around here, but a lot of the animals that are in this deck are animals that are found in North America, are animals that, you know, I feel like are in the area that I'm from, or the country that I'm from, I guess. And so I think because of that, I am able to get past it when there are, you know, random elephants, for example, in the deck. I also think I love that this deck is just so blue and beautiful. I love the kind of the line work in this art. Look at this kingfisher. Isn't this kingfisher beautiful? And so, you know, even though I don't tend to like animal decks from all over the world, that bring animals together from all over the world, this is one exception for me. The next deck deal breaker for me are decks that feel too ethereal. So I'm thinking about like Daniel Noel decks. I'm thinking about Rebecca Campbell decks. Just those decks that have a very ethereal feel to it. For whatever reason, I don't connect to that. That is not really as much a part of my spiritual practice. And so, you know, those decks are not for me. But I did recently get a deck that I think kind of breaks that rule. And so this deck is called the Rooted Remembering Tarot. And so this deck clearly, you know, has that kind of ethereal feel to it. And honestly, I don't really have a good explanation for why I like this deck and why this ethereal experience is okay for me in this deck. I also haven't worked with this deck a ton yet, so I'm still kind of getting to know it. But I do think that part of the reason why I like it so much is I like how much nature is involved in it. And I also think I like the sort of like cemetery or building structure that's kind of added into the picture. I'm not explaining that very well, but for whatever reason, it's like the mix of nature and sort of these buildings, these old buildings mixed together feels really cool to me. And so like this tower card, this is so cool. I love the way that art is layered. And so yeah, this is kind of my exception to my rule that in general, I don't like ethereal feeling decks. I just love looking at the art of this deck. I think the art draws me in. I think that that's part of the reason why I like this deck. And it also feels maybe a little bit gothic-y. Yeah. So I really like this one. This is the Remembrance Tarot. So another characteristic that tends to be a deal breaker for me is I am not always a fan of decks that are super photorealistic. For whatever reason, that just feels too real for me, and I don't like that as much. So one example is the Outlaw Oracle. That looks like such a cool deck. It just, you know, I've seen it around on other people's channels, and I've seriously thought about getting it because this keywords seem great. It just seems like a great deck, but it doesn't. I ended up deciding not to get it because of the photorealism aspect. And so I have a couple of decks that break this rule or this deck deal breaker. One of them is the Witch's Tarot, but the one that I'm going to show you all today is the Flow Tarot. This deck is definitely photorealistic. These kind of look like stock image photos, but it's really bright, it's really colorful. And for whatever reason, I like this deck. I found it for a reasonable price, so I decided to try it, and I started using it a lot more. I think part of it is I like the guidebook for this deck. I like that it has kind of a description, but then it also has sort of a little message at the end. Maybe not exactly an affirmation, but sort of like an affirmation. And so because of that, you know, I just like this deck. And this kind of breaks my no photorealistic decks rule. So my last deck deal breaker is an Oracle deck specifically that doesn't have a guidebook. I think, you know, sometimes if a deck has some great keywords, you know, you can make enough connections there that you don't need the guidebook, or I wouldn't need the guidebook. But in general, if they don't have a guidebook, I I'm not interested. I will say for me, it's a little bit different between Oracle and Tarot. I feel like when a Tarot deck doesn't have a guidebook, I have enough understanding of the cards to, that's okay, that's fine. But for an Oracle deck, you know, it could be whatever the creator wants it to be. And so I do struggle when there's no guidebook. This is a deck that I do currently have, but I am trying to decide if I want to keep it or not. This is the Nature's Portal Oracle. And this one does technically kind of have a guidebook that you can get, that but it really just focuses on the artist's, and I think it's the artist's mom, interaction with these beings or these animals or their connections to them. And it's not like a formal guidebook in that way. It doesn't tell you a keyword or like a meaning from it. And so I think because of that, I really struggle with this deck, and I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it, because in order to use it, I have to, you know, come up with a meaning on my own. And for some cards, I definitely could. But for example, with a panda, I don't have any connection to pandas really. And so I wouldn't really know what kind of keyword to make for this card. And so even though I have this deck right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it or not. And so I guess that's a question for you all. How do you work with decks that don't, like Oracle decks that don't have keywords or a guidebook? Do you just make them up on you, like come up with ones for yourself? Do you just use it intuition, use your intuition every time and just look at the images? I really struggle with oracles that don't have guidebooks. And one of the things that's hard is that I do really love this art in this deck. A lot of it, you know, besides like pandas, feel like the type of animals that I might see where I am. And of course, this pity card. I absolutely love this Pitbull card. And so because of that, and because the art is great, and because of the animals are animals that I identify with, I haven't gotten rid of this deck yet, but I don't know how to use it. And so that's why in general, Oracle decks that don't have guidebooks are deal breakers. I do have one exception to that. This is the Earthbound Oracle. This deck definitely does not have any kind of guidebook with it, but this one I can use just super intuitively. And I think that part of that is that the keywords are pretty good. And so the keywords are pretty easy for me to think about and connect with and pull into a reading. And so, you know, this is the exception. This is an Oracle deck that I really like and can use, even, oh, there's an eye though. I'm not a huge fan of eyes. But this is a deck that I can connect with, even though it doesn't have a guidebook with it. My question for you is, what are some of your deck deal breakers? What are some of the things that if that deck has it, it's likely going to be a no for you? I'm super curious to hear. If you want, you know, if you have a channel and you want to make a video, make sure you let me know. If you want to comment below, I would love to hear about what some of your deck deal breakers are. I also think a very important point is that at the end of the day for me, if I like a deck enough, it doesn't matter if it has these deal breakers or not. I'm going to get the decks that I'm going to get. And so I think, you know, the thing that I take away from this video is always going to be exceptions to what decks you like and you don't like, you know, even because I like a lot of different things and because there are so many amazing decks out there. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would like the video below, as well as hitting that subscribe button. I am generally trying to make videos about once a week, mostly related to tarot content. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, hitting that subscribe button will help you stay connected. Thanks for stopping by.